This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Monday, September 23rd. This is Africa 54. At least 7 students are dead and scores wounded in Nairobi following a school collapse. Young people around the world organize protests to demand action on climate change. And Nigeria's traditional boxing puts food on the table and athletes to work. Tragedy struck in the Kenyan capital Monday. Officials say at least 7 children were killed in Nairobi when a classroom floor collapsed as students were beginning their morning studies. Kenya's Education Secretary George Magoha was rushed to the scene of the accident and says at least 64 children are receiving treatment at a hospital, with 2 having serious injuries. David Doyle has more on this late report.
Several children have been killed and dozens more injured after a classroom collapsed in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, on Monday. A local lawmaker said the first floor of the Precious Talent School had given way, trapping the children below. Rescue workers have been sifting through the debris and carrying white body bags to an ambulance. As of Monday morning, a government spokesman said there had been 7 deaths and another 57 students taken to hospital.
We have regrettably lost 7 young lives to this morning's incident that occurred at around 8 a.m. as the learners in classes 5 to 8 were starting their morning lessons. May the good Lord rest their souls in perfect peace. I want to add by saying very firmly and categorically that the children of Kenya are safe in schools, and that we should not forget that we have close to 35,000 primary schools. And this single tragic incident must not be used by anyone to instill fear in our children in both public and private primary and secondary schools.
The cause was not immediately known, but authorities have previously warned that 30,000 to 40,000 buildings erected without approval in Nairobi are at risk of collapse. 3 years ago, a 6-story residential block fell down following heavy rains in the city, killing 51 people.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Now, young people worldwide have been organizing protests to demand action on climate change. Millions walked out of their schools and workplaces last Friday as part of protests leading up to the Youth Climate Summit at the United Nations in New York. Swedish teenage activist Greta Thunberg helped to inspire the demonstrations. VOA Saqib Al-Islam explains.
They marched, they chanted, and they expressed their concerns.
What do we want? Climate action!
Young activists around the world took the streets to demand an action on climate change. One of the biggest marches was held in New York, where heads of states of about 200 countries are convening at United Nations General Assembly this week. Before that, teen activist Greta Thunberg kicked off the first ever Youth Climate Summit at United Nations.
We are united, and that we, young people, are unstoppable.
Youth around the globe not only marched on the streets for climate, but also brought their ideas and solutions to share with the world leaders here at the United Nations.
Going to get an opportunity to pick up
17-year-old Amanda Rodrigues de Carvalho grew up in a self-regulating closed ecosystem in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And she presented this as a nature-based solution for climate change.
Just if we leave the forests and don't destroy them, we already have so many benefits. And if we work to preserve them and to restore the forests, you will have so much more.
Deforestation is one of the biggest problems.
Alhaji Ahmad Siraj Ba of Sierra Leone has a business which makes eco-friendly briquettes and paper bags for daily use.
I've been able to save more than 10,000 to 20,000 trees.
And Qiuqi Bai from China showed us bags and T-shirts made from used plastic bottles.
Made into one T-shirt.
With all these ideas, young people here also had a message for the world leaders who will attend a UN Climate Action Summit.
Youth are the future. Period.
2 words, act now. There is literally no more time to think about it. We have the facts, we have the science, we have the plans, we have the solutions. It's just time to make the decisions and act now.
We don't want to be inspiring, we don't want to be strong, we only want action.
You are risking my life, and I will not stand for it. I demand action from our government leaders.
A UN report to be released this week is expected to conclude that global warming and pollution are devastating oceans and polar regions. The Trump administration has cast doubt on a broad scientific consensus that the Earth is warming and human activity is mostly to blame. Saqibul Islam, VOA News, New York.
Now, for more on the climate change protests, let's go to the United Nations, where our VOA correspondent, Margaret Bashir, is standing by with the latest. Hello, Margaret. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, Esther. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, the enthusiasm, the passion of the children came here today, and we had Greta Thunberg speaking at the General Assembly at the Climate Summit for the grown-ups, and she had some strong words for the adults in the room. She told them they are failing her generation and that they have known about the climate science for 30 years and they've really done nothing. And she said, you're failing us, you're letting us down, and she demanded that they step up action to climate action. And she was really very fired up and very passionate today at this summit. The Secretary General was there, and he acknowledged that his generation had failed the young people, and he has been pressing for more commitments from countries. And we heard from leaders from some of the biggest polluters on the planet. We heard from the Indian Prime Minister, for instance, who said that his country, which is a big coal consumer and a big fossil fuel consumer, is trying to move more towards renewable energy. We heard from German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who said that emissions are too high in her country, and they're looking to phase out nuclear power by 2022 and to phase out coal by 2038. So there were some big commitments from big polluters. The United States did not participate in this summit. They were not expected to. As Saqib mentioned in his story, President Trump has announced his desire to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, but he actually did make an unscheduled appearance in the audience today. So President Trump was in the room for a short period during some of the speeches.
Margaret, an unprecedented kind of movement with the young people saying they are the future and fighting for the climate. What should we expect tomorrow?
Well, today is the climate summit. Tomorrow, I think we're going to hear, we begin the annual debate portion of the week, which is when the leaders all come to the podium in the General Assembly and talk about what's most pressing on their agenda. And I think we will hear a lot a continuation of this discussion about climate action, especially from developing countries, from small island nation states, countries that have experienced, for instance, in southern Africa, the cyclones, countries in the Caribbean where the hurricanes have been coming through lately. So we're going to hear from countries that have been impacted by climate change, and we're going to hear a call from them on the polluters and the people who are contributing most to global warming to do something about it. But I think the Secretary General's message is this is a global challenge and it needs global solutions. So everybody needs to work together.
Margaret, thank you so much for your excellent reporting. That's Margaret Bashir, VOA United Nations correspondent. Now, the United Nations General Assembly is underway in New York, and with a new president, Nigerian professor Tijani Muhammad Bande is leading the UNGA during this 74th UN session. He told VOA's Peter Claudy that he is focusing on development goals and greater respect for human rights.
Very important to emphasize no longer is it acceptable that rights are considered a preserve of one or the other region. I think let's be very clear. The global community does not accept this. Rights must be defended in all countries, and the rights of individuals and countries must be protected and advanced in all countries. That is why the notion of rights as universal makes sense. There are, of course, difficulties, especially in areas where there is conflict, but there are also areas in which, in the name of sovereignty, some countries find it difficult to listen when neighbors say that there are issues here. Again, the issue is conversation. Conversation and dialogue is really key, so that everyone appreciates that to ask your neighbor to do better is not that you want to do harm.
What about the focus on gender parity? Because I know it has been one of the key issues you've worked on as an ambassador. Talk to me about it. Will you have a special emphasis under your leadership as the President of the United Nations General Assembly?
Yeah, I think the task is clear. The United Nations has been very clear as to the importance of gender parity and equality in general in the context of inclusion, be it of youth or of women who are disproportionately seen in certain centers of power. But at the UN, at least at the senior positions, the Secretary General has shown a lot of progress has been made. Ours is to see, first in the office of the President of the General Assembly, we are able to achieve parity and equality in terms of respect for everyone's opinion as an equal contributor to the effort to be made. And at the same time, to see that in whatever we do, nobody will feel that one that either the youth or the men or the women are left out. I think this inclusion is key to us, and it is an important ethical principle.
Before your term expires, what task do you want to realize or achieve before your term expires, if I may ask you?
If we are able to improve trust among members, such that a bit more gets done, and for us, again, any effort to reduce extreme poverty or to improve access to quality education, I think we will consider that very top on the agenda.
Ambassador, what is your message to the continent?
We should continue to be positive in our relationship to the world with confidence, without arrogance, but being very clear to defend our rights as a continent, as we also must protect the rights of others, and to give everything to support collective efforts to create and maintain a safer, more prosperous world.
That was Nigerian Tijani Muhammad Bande, the new president of the UN General Assembly, speaking with VOA's Peter Clotty at the United Nations. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, blood sport meets mixed martial arts in Nigeria. We'll be back.
We're talking about the news and issues you're talking about, sharing stories of development and growth across Africa,
around the world, and in our lives. Topics that inform, empower,
and change the rules.
It's time for Our Voices with me, Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick,
and Hadiza Kiari,
and Ayan Bior,
and Orion Itangi Shaka.
It's time for Our Voices.
I am Sheikh Asali, host and senior editor of VOA's international calling talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. The biggest red carpet fashion trend at this year's top awards ceremony for Best in Television was a very specific color pairing. A host of TV's buzziest actresses descended on the Emmys' purple carpet, wearing dual-toned pink and red dresses. As far as winners, the British invasion took hold, as half of 2019's Emmy Awards were handed to UK shows and talent. Next up, millennials from across the Philippines flocked to a convention center in Manila for the country's biggest tattoo expo. This year's event showcased 300 tattoo artists, with over a dozen of them hailing from foreign countries. Organizers say tattoos have become more acceptable in Philippine society since when the event began in the 1990s. And finally, for 8 hours every Sunday, a circuit of Bogotá's busy streets are cleared of motorized vehicles, letting the city's residents exercise in peace. The Colombian capital's normally congested roads become a colorful mix of cyclists, pets being taken for a walk, and numerous other activities. Local government officials claim over 1 million people take part in the weekly event. Car-free spaces have become popular across the globe in recent years. And that's what's trending today.
Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar recently returned from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda, where he spoke with officials and visited an Ebola treatment center in Butembo near the eastern border. For more on Secretary Azar's visit, I'm joined by veteran VOA journalist Mil Sega, who traveled with the Secretary. Mil, yes. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me, Esther. This is such an important story. I'm just glad that we can talk about it.
Definitely. Now, after touring 3 countries, what did Secretary Azar observe?
Well, let me first of all state what the purpose of this mission was. Yes. It was threefold. I spoke with the Secretary about this, and he said one of the things he wanted to do there was to make sure that U.S. commitment was clear in the region, also to emphasize the seriousness of the Ebola crisis there, which, as you know, is now the 2nd worst outbreak in history, right? But he also, one of the things he really wanted to do was impress the rest of the world and rally international support for what is going on in the DRC and in Rwanda and Uganda along the porous border of the DRC, where a lot of back and forth foot travel is going on, some of them infected people.
Right. So did the U.S. make any commitments to help eradicate Ebola, especially in the hardest hit area, which is DRC?
Yeah, well, the U.S. commitment in the region is actually quite solid. It has been for quite some time. The United States has already injected something in the neighborhood of $300 million into that region to control the fight against Ebola. A lot of that money is being spent on building treatment centers. A lot of it is being spent on training. The CDC is training a lot of local people in DRC to train them how to detect, how to treat these people who are infected with the Ebola virus. But my biggest observation there is that the U.S. health delegation actually brought a lot of good news to that region. They basically are introducing 2 new treatments there that are proving very, very effective.
Now, aside from the officials of the U.S., as a reporter, what did you observe?
You know, it's scary. If you read all the stories and you go there, yeah, you're naturally a little bit apprehensive about what you're gonna see there. But here's what I noticed: there are clear protocols in place now when you go to any of these areas that are affected by the Ebola virus. And the first thing that you'll notice is everybody shakes hands this way. You ever heard of the Ebola handshake? Wow. Nobody shakes hands anymore. It's just an Ebola handshake. The moment you walk in through any of those ports, your shoes are disinfected. You are given something to sterilize your hands, and before you can go any further, somebody will check your temperature to make sure you don't have a fever. So what they're doing now is they're controlling access in and out of these communities, and that's part of what needs to be done in this area to stop the spread of Ebola.
Now, DRC, as we said, is the hardest hit in that region. Mm-hmm. You spoke to some people there. What's the general reaction of people in DRC regarding this outbreak?
Initially, distrust of Western medicine, right? And that's partly the fault of a lot of the warring factions in that region. As you know, it's a very decentralized area. It's controlled, much of it is controlled by warring factions. The ADF has a very strong presence there. And what they have been trying to do is destabilize some of these villages, prevent people from seeking treatment at these treatment centers. And you know what they're doing? They're saying, do not go to these treatment centers because these are dying centers. You walk in there and you walk out in a box. And a lot of people, a lot of the effort right now is going towards educating these people. And I spoke to a survivor of the Ebola virus. She was treated fairly early, and she's making it her life's mission to go to all of these different villages and say, please, the sooner we diagnose you with Ebola, the better your chances of survival. This is a disease that used to claim 2 out of 3 lives, no longer.
Great story.
New medicines are actually improving the mortality rate to under 10%.
Now, very quickly, are people generally in that region concerned about this cross-border, people moving from one country to another?
Absolutely. And I think the biggest challenge right now, besides treatment centers, installing more treatment centers, is actually getting the message out that Ebola is no longer incurable. That is the big story that I got out of this. It is no longer incurable. The earlier you seek treatment, the better your chances of survival. So hopefully we can nip this in the bud and stop Ebola in its tracks, we hope.
Right. Mil, excellent reporting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Our great thanks to VOA's Mil Asega. It's time for Monday Sports Report, and joining us now is Sandy Shomari. Hello, Sandy. What's happening in the world of sports?
Thanks, Esther. A lot is happening, and it is confirmed that England and DC United star Wayne Rooney is leaving Washington just a little over a year after joining the U.S. Major League Soccer team. The 33-year-old star forward will join England's second-tier Derby County as a player and a coach after wrapping up his 2019 season with Major League Soccer. Rooney became DC United's highest-paid player last year after signing a record transfer deal from Premier club Everton. At the time, the Washington Post reported his 2.5-year deal contract was worth a whopping $13 million. Rooney says his decision to return to England, where he has made hundreds of appearances, is widely considered to be one of the greatest players, was prompted by a desire to move closer to his extended family. And the International Association of Athletics Federations and the World Anti-Doping Agency are set to decide this week whether to include Russia in future international sporting events. Russia's Athletics Federation had its World membership suspended 4 years ago after a report found evidence of widespread state-sponsored doping. The country held its annual marathon on Sunday in Moscow with thousands of runners attending. Iskandar Yadgarov won in 2 hours and 18 minutes, but since he is affected by the ban, he has been unable to compete overseas as a Russian athlete. IAAF has voted 11 times to keep Russia from rejoining the World Athletics body, saying it needs evidence that Russia is enforcing doping bans and that all Russian athletes have embraced to the change to a new anti-doping culture. And now, let's talk boxing, shall we? There are some tough athletes competing in traditional Nigerian boxing called Dambe. It is a fierce, with a few restrictions, form of fighting. It is called the sport of the warriors. And thanks to online fundraising, these fighters are now getting paid. VOA's Arash Arabasadi takes us behind the scenes.
No mouthpiece and not much padding on the fists. This is a sport of warriors.
Even before I became a Dambe fighter, I have always loved to fight.
The traditional Nigerian combat sport of Dambe features two fighters beating on each other until one knocks the other down or quits.
I used to fight with everyone, and they complained to my parents. Then, one day, I saw a group of people fighting Dambe, and I knew I could do it.
A fighter first wraps his or her dominant hand with straps called kara before tying a cord around the wraps. Traditionally, fighters dip the striking hand in resin and broken glass. Times have changed.
The overall goal for us as a company is basically to elevate the sport from these rustic grounds into an internationally recognized sport. You understand? Put it out there on the likes of the UFC and the MMA.
Anthony Okaleke co-founded the fight promotion Dambe Warriors in 2017. The sport's growing popularity means money for everyone.
Before me, I entered Dambe. I am very happy with my life because I get food to eat when I compete in this sport. I get money to relax with my friends and family.
In 2 years, the company attracted 100,000 subscribers with more than 24 million views from a handful of countries, including Thailand and the United States.
So for us, it's about building this Dambe Warriors franchise as a sporting asset in Africa. It's like the biggest combat sports in Africa.
The sport has a few loose rules, like sometimes it is okay to kick. And while technically there are 3 rounds, fights seldom go the distance. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
Very interesting. And that wraps our sports coverage for today. Esther, back to you.
You know, Sunday, one thing I've never understood is why somebody has to fight somebody and they didn't do anything to them. Tell me a little more about that boxing.
It's interesting, Esther, because as you see, this is a different form of fighting. It's a traditional boxing. In boxing, you always know there's a jab, 1-2, fight, go the distance. But with Dambe, this is interesting because people are coming up in Nigeria with their own kind of thing to bring in boxing or traditional boxing to a new level. So I think this is something that is great to the African continent, and not only WWA or MMF, but this is a different kind of fighting where, Esther, you see, these are warriors coming to fight. Maybe we'll see that happening in Washington, D.C. sometime?
Well, quite some workout, Sunday, I would say. Thank you so much. Be sure to join Sunday Shomari each Monday for another sports report right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.